the Diocese of Erie, Pennsylvania. The story of the faith in this region began with the travels and explorations of French, Canadian, and European immigrant settlers. It grew steadily through the 19th and 20th centuries under the guidance of holy bishops, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop Lawrence T. Persico.
And I think we're all on this journey. I think it's a constant encounter with Christ in our ministry, in the people we encounter, and the work we do.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the Cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. Erie, Pennsylvania sits along the southern shores of one of the 5 Great Lakes. It is also the sea city of the Diocese of Erie.
Erie's a wonderful city. I like it. The people here are very generous, warm, outgoing. I was very comfortable once I got here with knowing the people. The city itself, I think, is a beautiful city with the bayfront and lake. It's easily accessible from Buffalo, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh because of the highways. So it's really a great place to live. And it's a place that still has values.
The city of Erie, Pennsylvania sits along the southern shores of Lake Erie. Indigenous peoples inhabited this area for thousands of years, but in more recent history, it was the Iroquois-speaking Erie Nation that occupied the area, giving the nearby Great Lake and later-day modern city their name.
The Diocese of Erie was founded in 1853, and the first bishop was Michael O'Connor, a native of Ireland who studied for the priesthood in Rome, where his classmates would include the future U.S. bishops Francis Kenrick and Martin Spalding. And it was Bishop Kenrick who recruited O'Connor to work in the United States. The man appointed his successor in Pittsburgh, Joshua Young, did not want to accept the appointment. He did, however, agree to become Bishop of Erie, and so the two switched positions, with Bishop O'Connor returning to Pittsburgh after only 1 year as Bishop of Erie. A convert to Catholicism, Bishop Young worked to build up the Catholic Church's institutional presence in the Diocese of Erie during its founding years. He invited the Sisters of St. Joseph to the diocese to establish a school and an orphanage, and he also worked to establish parishes in the oil regions following the discovery of oil in Titusville.
Before Young even becomes a Catholic, he's working in a newspaper in Maine where his family was from originally. The paper had a very anti-Catholic sentiment, yet one of the men that he worked with was a Catholic and introduced Young to the writings and of some of the saints and the Gospels, and he fell in love with Catholicism, converted, and then eventually enters the seminary. I think it's very fitting that we have this man who is a convert himself going to evangelize the faith there. Bishop Young serves the faithful of the diocese with a great deal of care and compassion. It was a very rural and very poor diocese, covering over 10,000 square miles, so he had a vast amount of territory, but he was very, very dedicated to making sure that their educational needs were met.
The Benedictine Sisters of Erie came to Western Pennsylvania from Bavaria in the mid-1800s. Part of their mission was to educate the German immigrant children of the area. So for over 150 years, they've been living in this part of Pennsylvania. living in this communal, prayerful life created by St. Benedict nearly 1,500 years ago.
Gannon University was founded in the 30s, and the idea was to give the working people a place to go to school. It was all men at the time. It grew after the Second World War because of the GI Bill and a lot of the GIs coming home. It started to grow.
Bishop Mullen has a wonderful grand vision for the future of the diocese. And with this grand vision, he has the idea of a beautiful cathedral. So it creates these wonderful plans and contracts Patrick Keeley, one of the more famous church architects in the United States, to build St. Peter's Cathedral. Some called it Mullen's folly because perhaps his plans were bigger than the budget. This church does get built in a style that is just breathtaking and stands out as one of the landmarks in the city of Erie.
To preserve the cathedral for generations to come, the diocese is in the midst of a 4-year restoration of St. Peter's.
St. Peter's Cathedral was completed in 1893, and it really is recognizably an important Catholic building. Everything about it lets us know that this is really built for the glory of God. It has a central tower flanked by 2 smaller towers, which really call to mind both the 3-part nature of God, the Trinity, as well as that scene of Calvary with Christ crucified with 2 others. The top of the central tower is a clock, and so that is a reminder of the call to prayer and an invitation to join in the liturgy inside.
So our cathedral is made out of brown stone from Orleans County, New York, and white sandstone that highlights everything around the windows and all through the exterior of the cathedral. That's from Mercer County, Pennsylvania. The tower actually started to list into the nave of the cathedral. And it happened because Erie is famous for having excruciatingly hot, humid summers sometimes, and then freezing winters where we're, down to the -20s sometimes. So one cold winter, those cast iron bands that wrapped around the interior of that tower broke. And on inspection, they saw that it was listing into the cathedral. The cathedral actually had to be closed for an entire year, so the whole tower had to be taken down to the top of the clock and then rebuilt and put back up.
This is a really good example of Gothic architecture. The floor plan is cruciform, so it means it's in the shape of a cross, a body with 2 outstretched arms. And in the typical Gothic style, the experience is one of being in the forest. So you have columns, which we can really think of as tree trunks, reaching into the ceiling, which is vaulted. And you have these ribs that sort of spring from colonnettes in the nave walls and into a canopy. So you can imagine this experience of being in the forest, looking through the ribs and the dappled light coming through the stained glass. And like all Keeley churches, this one is exceptional in the quality of its artwork. The windows were made by Myers of Munich, the sort of master stained glass makers still in existence today.
The windows that were in the sanctuary were original too. Depict the life of Christ. So the Annunciation of Mary's announcing that she's going to have a child, the birth of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, Christ rising from the dead, and then the second coming of Christ. So those were all original to the cathedral, and they were the first windows placed in the cathedral. They all came from Germany and are superb stained glass.
I like the sanctuary. I just like all of it. I think it's just so well done, and it's just a magnificent building. It's large, I hope welcoming, and it's a place to encounter Christ.
The cathedra inside the Cathedral of St. Peter represents Bishop Persico's authority as the Apostle of Erie.
I was born in Monessen, Pennsylvania, which is the neighboring diocese to Erie. And Monessen at the time was a steel town. So my family and most of the people worked in the steel industry in the town. It was the home of Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel. My brother worked there, my grandfathers worked there, and during the summers in college, I worked there. It's very down to earth. The people there are, what you see is what you get. Very blue collar. You know, the great interest in you do your job, take care of your family, and many, for the most part, you know, church plays a part in their lives too. By the early 80s, things just went south for the steel industry. And the mill closed, and a lot of people were laid off, and especially the younger people who went into working in the mill after high school realized that there was no future there. So it was difficult. There was always that great hope that, you know, industry would come back, but it never did. At the high point, my hometown had 28,000 people. And right now, they're lucky if they have 6,000. So it's mainly the elderly, because the young people, which is, I think, typical of northeastern United States, once they graduate college, they go elsewhere for work. So they all move out. I went to a Catholic, the parish grade school, plus the fact that I was an altar server. So it was always there. And in the 8th grade, I was interested in going off to the high school seminary because our diocese, the Diocese of Greensburg, my home diocese, had just opened a high school seminary. So I decided I wanted to take the test. My parents were good about it because they never said yes or no. It was sort of like, well, you know, you go find out and see what happens.
After graduating from the Diocesan High School Seminary in Greensburg, Pennsylvania in 1969, he earned a BA in philosophy in 1973. Graduated from St. Vincent Seminary in Latrobe, Pennsylvania in 1975 with a Master of Divinity degree. Bishop Persico was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Greensburg on April 30th, 1977.
The night before, I remember our class was ordained. It was a tradition that you gathered at what was called St. Emma's Retreat House, run by the Benedictine Sisters in Greensburg, that you stayed overnight, and the class came together, and, you know, it was a time of reflection and prayer. I was assigned to the largest parish in the diocese. There were 4 priests there. There was the administrator, who actually ran the place, the pastor in name only, and two assistants. And quite frankly, it was like a factory. All we did was, you know, we had about 8 masses on a weekend, all the sacraments, marriages, baptisms. So for 3 years, there was a lot going on.
In June of 1980, Persico was released from parish ministry to study canon law at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he received his licentiate degree in 1982.
I just got called in one day, and the bishop said, well, we're sending you to study canon law. And I said, why? And he said, well, we all don't live forever. And I thought, wow, that's profound. No wonder he's a bishop. I thought this was going to be a summer course. I had no idea. I really didn't have any aspiration to study canon law. And then, you know, as I started to look into it, I found out it was a 2-year course. It wasn't a summer course. So the bishop said that I was going, I went. And I was at the Catholic University for 2 years. I started off working part-time in the tribunal and part-time in the chancery. I was appointed assistant chancellor and judge on the tribunal. So I did tribunal work and administration. But as time was going on in my assignment, I was being pulled more and more into administration.
Persico was appointed Chancellor of the Diocese of Greensburg in 1989 and served as the bishop's representative to the Administrative Board of the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference from 1998 to 2012. On July 31, 2012, Pope Benedict XVI appointed him Bishop of Erie.
One day, I'll never forget, it was a Friday, the secretary was off that day, and the phone rang. It rang in the office and in the church hall. So I answered the phone, and it was the nuncio. And the nuncio said to me, the Holy Father has appointed you Bishop of Erie. Do you give consent? And I could tell all the talking stopped behind me. And they were listening. And I said, Archbishop, I really can't speak now. Can I go over to the rectory and call? He said, well, go right away and call me back, which I did do. And that's when we had the conversation. And, I knew Bishop Troutman from the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference. He had visited Greensburg. In fact, he did a talk on the liturgy in Greensburg. So, I knew him. I knew Erie was still in Pennsylvania. And it wasn't that far. It was a neighboring diocese. So, I said yes. 30 years in the office in Greensburg. You knew the personalities of all the priests. You knew the parishes. It's a small diocese, 4,000 square miles. So you knew the parishes. You knew where problems were. You knew where successes were. So it was pretty comfortable. Then I came here, and I only knew 2 priests, and Bishop Troutman I knew. So those were the only 3 people. So that was kind of unsettling after 30 years to come into a new place and start to know where the light switches are, where the landmines are. But, I had a lot of good help and good staff when I got there. We had to start doing pastoral planning, looking at parishes. We changed models on Catholic schools, created systems. One of the things I did was to promote vocations. But when pastors were named and installed, the dean would do it. So I changed it and said, I will go and install them. And also, it'd be an opportunity for me to speak about vocations. We have men studying here at St. Mark's, going to Gannon, and then some men at St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore, and St. Vincent Seminary in Latrobe. Overall, it's a good presbyterate. They're very generous men. Whether they're in the East or the West, they take their priesthood seriously. So it's a good group of priests to work with.
Bishop Persico has worked hard to lead his people toward the future with hope, faith, and a sense of humor.
As I always say, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And I think that, it's very interesting because I had these plans about getting out of office work, going back to a full-time parish, and God said, it changed. And I think the best thing to do is take a deep breath. You're not going to know everything the first day. Don't be afraid. And God has called you to this ministry. So he will give you the grace to do it. It may be messy, but he'll give it to you.